So Craig Wilson is joining from Brisbane. So he's the Chair of Sustainability at Ports Australia, and so Port of Brisbane Head of Sustainability. He's going to be talking about the role and challenges of Australian ports in facilitating the emissions reductions journey for the global shipping fleet. I'll hand over
thanks,
to
Shirley.
you. Yep.
You can see that all right?
Yeah, we can.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so as Shirley said, Craig Wilson, I'm the Head of Sustainability at the Port of Brisbane, but more here in my role as the Chair of the Ports Australia Climate Change and Decarbonisation Subcommittee. So I guess I'll just present tonight on a brief overview of Ports Australia and Australian ports, although Michaela's already sort of done that. An overview of the recently released Ports Australia greenhouse gas inventory guidance for ports. Then I'll just cover some of the opportunities for ports to facilitate emissions in the shipping sector and give some examples of what we're already doing in that space. And then finally, just provide a summary of some of the challenges that ports are facing in their role in trying to facilitate reduction in shipping. So I guess Ports Australia first. Ports Australia is the peak industry body for national ports in Australia. It's made up, I think, all of the large commercial trading ports in Australia are members of Ports Australia. Also has a number of international port members now across New Zealand and the Pacific Islands, and then has a large number of associate members, largely from organisations that support ports, areas like consultancy and things like that. And I guess what Ports Australia does is provide a really good mechanism to bring ports and our stakeholders together to address issues that are common across the port sector, and does this, I guess, through a number of working groups. So there's working groups across a variety of different aspects that we cover at the port. We have the Environment Planning and Sustainability Working Group, there's Marketing Communications Working Group, Engineering Working Group, Safety, Port Security, Finance, etc. So anything you can think of in the port industry, there's a working group for. And then what we see that comes out of those working groups, and certainly a good example is the climate change and decarbonisation subcommittee, is where there's sort of a common issue that's identified, and there needs to be action taken. We'll form a subcommittee of one of those groups to specifically address that action, which is what we've done in climate change. So Australian ports themselves, we've largely just heard about this, but we are extremely critical for the economic and social development of Australia. Over 98% of all trade to Australia comes through seaports, given that we're an island nation. And I'll add that Australian ports are quite diverse, and I guess no two ports the same. We've got capital city sort of container ports that are servicing, I guess, the community through importing goods. We've got the larger bulk ports, the iron ore ports in WA, the coal ports in Queensland and New South Wales. Then we've got the smaller regional ports as well that are quite diverse in the commodities that they handle. And then we've got different setups in those ports. So we've got a number of government-owned ports. We've got a number of private ports as well, different environmental settings. So Port of Brisbane, for example, where we're in a marine park, you've got the Queensland ports that are in the Great Barrier Reef, and a number of different challenges sort of in that environmental space. And then our key stakeholders are different as well. So capital city ports, we've got, I guess, a large community base that we have to deal with. Some of those remote ports, less so. But what we do is we do share a common interest, and I guess we try and work together to address those challenges, and decarb's a really good example of that. And I guess that did lead to the development of the greenhouse gas guidance for ports. So what we saw there is, I guess, ports struggling to understand their greenhouse gas emissions, to collect data and to report on those greenhouse gas emissions. So I guess there was a desire to better understand port emissions and how we could better manage those emissions through data gathering. We're also seeing mandatory carbon reporting requirements coming into play, and there's certainly a lack of guidance for ports in that space. So as I said before, a lot of this is driven by the complexity of ports. We have overlapping jurisdictions. As I said, we've got private ports, we've got government-owned ports. We also have multiple stakeholders. So we've got the shipping industry, we've got road transport, we've got our customers at the port themselves. Some ports handle towage, some others don't. So there's quite a complex range of stakeholders we have to deal with. And I guess a sort of significant difference for ports as well is we don't necessarily produce a good. We're more of a cog in the supply chain, so that makes us a little bit unique as well in that we're not sort of manufacturing a good. We're facilitating trade. So I guess that sort of makes applying common greenhouse gas inventory guidance quite challenging for ports. So we decided to develop our own Australian guidance for ports, and I guess what that was to provide a comprehensive, easy to understand guidance on how we can quantify and report our greenhouse gas emissions. And particularly relating to shipping, Scope 3 was certainly seen as a big challenge for us, especially setting the boundary setting for Scope 3 emissions, both the physical boundary and the reporting boundary as well. So I won't tell people to suck eggs. You all know what Scope 3 emissions are. But we did identify that shipping emissions definitely sit within that Scope 3 emissions, within that Scope 3 emissions boundary as a downstream emission from port activities. And as I said, the boundary setting was quite challenging for that. There was, I guess, agreement when we were developing these guidance to set our boundaries on port limits. So areas that ports had the ability to influence the activities that were undertaken within their jurisdiction. So where we had some control and influence over that activity, that's what we set that a boundary for. And it was, as I said, it was agreed that we would include shipping within Scope 3 emissions when the vessel was within port limits. And only the vessels that were using the port. So we're not reporting on vessels that are transiting through the port, recreational vessels and ferries, etc., where they're not necessarily using port infrastructure. So that they've been recently released. They are available on the Ports Australia website if anyone wanted to have a look at those. I think across the industry, everyone's pretty happy with those. They're prescriptive, but not too prescriptive, provide a good amount of flexibility for ports, and I think they'll get a wide take-up and use across the ports industry. And certainly, as we're talking about reduction of emissions in shipping, I think they'll help ports quantify the emissions from shipping and then allow ports to focus on how we can assist in reducing emissions from shipping. As I say that, I'll move to, I guess, the opportunity we see in reducing shipping emissions. And as I said, as we understand what those emissions are, we can take actions to reduce those emissions. And to date, even calculating those emissions has been quite challenging. We don't have a direct control over ships, so our role's more of a facilitation role. I guess we have some ability, but quite limited ability to direct ships in what they can do. So the port's role, I guess, is more in facilitating that shipping industry in their own transition, providing fuels if they're looking for fuels, providing things like shore power, as Michaela said, sort of that just-in-time arrival type system. So developing systems that make shipping more efficient so that they can reduce their emissions. And we have seen some examples to date across the ports of this happening already. Yeah, I don't know if people are aware the Geelong Hydrogen Hub. The Geelong port is trying to establish a hydrogen hub in Geelong to help establish the transition to low emission fuels there. And I guess their intention there is to provide green methanol bunkering opportunities to vessels coming to Australia. We've also seen a bit of work in shore power. The Port Authority of New South Wales are probably most advanced in that space in providing shore power to cruise vessels and bulk vessels that use the White Bay terminal, both the cruise terminal there and the bulk terminal there. They're quite advanced in installing that infrastructure to those facilities. A number of other ports, including Port of Brisbane, have advanced feasibility studies and are now starting to progress more detailed design work around shore power. Cruise seems to be the leading shipping industry for shore power. The work we did, I think 85% of the vessels that come to Brisbane, the cruise vessels that come to Brisbane, are shore power enabled. So there's sort of a high percentage of the cruise vessels we're getting into Australia can plug in right now. So they seem to be sort of the low-hanging fruit for shore power, but there's certainly work being done across other vessel classes, across bulk vessels, container vessels, and ro-ro vessels as well. There's also been a lot of work done on green shipping corridors, looking at the Singapore Australia green shipping corridor to some of the east coast ports, I should say, and also the iron ore corridor to the northwest as well. And then we've seen a number of biofuel bunkering trials as well across Australian ports. There's been stuff done in Albany. We've done stuff in Brisbane. North Queensland bulk ports have also done some work at Hay Point as well. And I'm sure there's others across the port industry that are looking at that biofuel bunkering trials for vessels. And here's a specific example that we've trialled in Port Hedland. So we use a UKC system to provide vessel journey plans through our channel. We have a 90-kilometre long shipping channel, and we use that UK system, I guess, for safe access to ensure those ships don't run aground. So that's a physics-based model that uses environmental parameters, things like waves, sea state, tides, currents, etc. And I guess what we identified there was the opportunity to incorporate shipping efficiency into that UKC system, where ships could take advantage of largely current, so tidal conditions, to reduce RPM and subsequently reduce fuel and emissions. So we undertook a trial in May and June last year, partnering with the regional harbour master, with both Maersk and CMA CGM and the marine pilots to I guess trial what we call the green button, so putting that efficiency module within our UKC system. And what we found in that trial, we got, I guess, our outcomes were much higher than expected. On one of the, we trialled 6 vessels. On one of the vessels we trialled, we had a 51% emission reduction in fuel use from that vessel in our channel, which was quite mind blowing actually. And that was there's very limited changes. One of the parameters we had to meet was the vessel couldn't be delayed at its time on berth arrival. So there was very little change in the time of the journey of the vessel. It was purely speeding up and slowing down, and you can sort of see that in that graph that I've got there. So the blue line is the vessel trend, is the normal UKC transit. The green one is where they provided the green button. So you can see that vessel did start its transit a little bit early, probably about half an hour early. It was faster across the first part of that journey, so probably used more fuel. But then when it got to a certain point in that journey, it slowed down to take advantage of the tidal conditions compared to what it would have done in its normal UKC journey, and arrived at berth at the same time that it would have. So we have got a few challenges that we're working through. Pilots found it quite challenging. They're sort of used to operating the vessels in a certain way, and this sort of changed the way it did that. There were challenges with vessels arriving late, etc. So we had to sort of change the transit plan on the run. So we're currently working through those, and we're looking to roll that out probably in early 2026. And I guess finally, then, some of the challenges that ports are facing in regards to facilitating the emissions reductions for ships, and Michaela did touch on some of these. So I guess one of our biggest challenges is that shipping is a global industry, and we are subject to those global issues. So they can be positive and negative. I'll put one of the negative ones there is that Australia is a bit of a backwater, sort of lower volume route. So we generally get the hand-me-down vessels. So all the new vessels go on the east-west routes between Europe, Asia, and America, and we tend to get the smaller hand-me-down. So in the container vessel area in particular. So I guess as those newer alternate fuels vessels are being built, they're not really being built for the Australian route. So it'll be a little bit of time, especially in that container vessel space, before we see some of those alternate fuel vessels come down to Australia. In saying that, on the positive side, I guess the bulk vessels and some other vessels, we're sort of seeing it in the car carrier market as well, is we do tend to get newer vessels. So some ports, we've seen sort of the biofuel bunkering, and we have seen some LNG vessels coming through Australian ports as well. So I know there's been a car carrier that's been purely LNG powered that's come through Australian ports. We've seen a couple of bit ironic, but crude oil vessels that are powered by LNG, and I know a lot of the LNG vessels themselves are also powered by LNG. I guess in saying that as well, we're also seeing some uncertainty around what the alternate fuel is going to be. In the short term, those drop-in fuels seem to be a good solution. The biofuels and LNG is we're also starting to see that. In terms of the hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives, whilst we're starting to see a little bit of action in that area, there's still a lot of uncertainty around what that ultimate fuel is going to be. If there's going to be an ultimate fuel, there might be a range of different fuels that are used in vessels. Electricity is unlikely to be a source of energy for the larger vessels unless a better sort of battery is developed. We just can't get the energy storage that we need to power the big commercial vessels. But again, another positive is Australia is really well placed for providing those alternate fuels. We've got good source of renewable energy, so we can potentially produce those alternate fuels quite cheaply. As Michaela touched on, we're not really well equipped for bunkering. We don't bunker a lot of vessels currently. If we do, it's generally through barges. So a number of the ports have bunker barges, particularly for the cruise vessels where the vessels are staying in Australia. We're bunkering those through barges rather than through onshore bunkering. So there isn't a lot of scope currently without significant infrastructure upgrade for bunkering. And the final challenge, I guess, we've got there is what we see at ports is our electrical networks are quite constrained. So ports are developing quite quickly. We're quite energy intensive, and we're sort of got a big demand already, and infrastructure needs to be significantly upgraded, especially when you're talking about shore power. You look at a cruise vessel, and they've got sort of a peak demand of around 12 to 14 megawatt, and that's essentially a small country town that you're powering, so that requires quite significant electrical upgrades. We're already seeing sort of electrification of landside operations with sort of container stacking equipment and trucks and cars becoming electric. So that's sort of increasing the demand of ports. So that's going to be a major challenge for us as well. And that's me.